Americans for Liberties Forum. My name is Daniel Jafari, and I'm the president of IAL. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of having very special guests discussing matters of grave importance to Iranians all across the globe. But before I go any further, I must introduce my co-host, Mr. Shervan Fashandi. He's a dear friend and a great conversationalist. Today's event is held on the anniversary of the tragic loss of life that resulted in untold suffering for the families and friends and compatriots of 176 people. These people boarded a flight to be reunited with their loved ones, but instead became the latest casualties in a never-ending war waged by the Islamic Republic against life and peace. These people were escaping the hellish circumstances imposed by the Islamic Republic, by the goons who run Iran denied them the human right to self-determination. As we approach January 8th, we're humbled to have an aviation expert and one of the so many family members of the victims of this cowardly act. Mr. Khosrow Beytollahi is a former fighter jet pilot of Iranian Imperial Air Force and an aviation expert joining us today from California to help us understand the technical aspects of this incident. We're still waiting for Mr. Beytollahi to join us. I should mention Mr. Beytollahi is also a member of the Central Committee of the Constitutional Party of Iran. We also have Mr. Shahin Moghaddam, who is a Canadian citizen, joining us today from Toronto. He has lost his beloved wife and son as a result of the attack on Flight 752 of Ukrainian Air. Gentlemen, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Mr. Moghaddam, please accept my condolences. Before we start, let me go through some ground rules. In the interest of time, I would like to speak as little as possible to give the most time to our esteemed guests. Our audience are also invited to submit their questions and comments via the chat function of this Zoom meeting. And Brian will help us collect all these questions. And should we have time at the end for our Q&A, I promise we'll answer as many of them as possible. And if English is not your first language, please don't hesitate to submit questions in Farsi, and I'll ask Mr. Fashandi to translate for us. Very well. Let me start with Mr. Fashandi. What do you think of the political atmosphere, the security atmosphere of Iran before the attack on the Ukrainian Flight 752? Was there any relation between this and the termination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the military force of the IRGC?
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm honored to be here co-hosting this event. I think it's beneficial to review the sequence of events that led to this tragedy, this human tragedy. It's not a coincidence that this human tragedy occurred just 5 days after the termination of the top terrorist of the regime, Qasem Soleimani. So who was Qasem Soleimani and why was he terminated? Qasem Soleimani was the head of the Quds force, which is the foreign arm of IRGC. I mean, for most Iranians, this information is basically the basics, so it may be repetitive for them, but I think there's some value in reviewing some basic facts. Basically, in Iran, after the 1979 revolution, there are two armed forces, effectively two armies, two parallel armies. One is the conventional army that existed before the revolution, and it's tasked with defending the borders, etc., like a normal army. And then there's the other one, which does not even have the name Iran in it, and it's a completely ideological army, similar to the Red Army of the Communist Party in Soviet Union, etc. It's called Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And as insidious as it sounds, it has an even more nefarious arm, which is called the foreign arm of IRGC. the Quds Force. And it's named after Quds, which is the Arabic word for Jerusalem in Persian and in Arabic language. So even the naming reveals all the intentions that this foreign arm of IRGC has no defensive value, and it is formed precisely for the cause of liberation of Jerusalem, and more broadly to create guerrilla war and fund and arm militia all over the Middle East and create civil wars, etc. And we see the fruit of this planning basically in Yemen, all over in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and all over the place. So Soleimani was the head of the Quds Force, and a week before he was killed, he was targeted and killed on January 3rd, 2020. He had planned an uprising by the Shia militia in Iraq to target the US embassy in Baghdad. And they would write slogans like "Soleimani is our leader" on the wall of the embassy right after vandalizing it. So IRGC, particularly Quds Force, was sending message after warning after warning, threatening the United States, and eventually the guy had it coming and he was annihilated. And immediately after that, the regime started a huge propaganda machine, a propaganda operation, which backfired and failed miserably. First, they organized a funeral to portray him as a hero of the people, a folk hero. And about 70 people got killed, basically in a stampede in his funeral, because these idiots can't even plan a proper funeral. It's pure incompetence. And then they wanted to do something. They had to attack some US base without actually causing any real harm to the American troops, because they knew that if they cause any damage, any kill any American soldiers, then that would probably start a war. So they notified the Iraqi and American forces to vacate the military base and effectively attacked an empty military base with missiles. But that very night, all their anti-air defense system in Iran was on maximum alert, expecting a retaliation, a hit back from the Americans. But they did not cancel commercial flights. So that was like one deliberate mistake. I'm not sure if you can call it a mistake. To me, it sounds like using commercial flight as a human shield, which is a war crime in itself. And then they claim that they mistakenly, IRGC Air Defense claims that they mistakenly targeted a commercial flight, which was not even landing in Iran, to be mistaken by with a missile, but it was taking off from Tehran's main airport. And we'll discuss and review the details, and it was hit more than once, which decreases the likelihood that we can generously attribute it to a one-time human error, etc. And this tragedy happens. So that's the backdrop of this story.
Thank you very much. I think it was a good primer for people who might be a little bit less familiar with the circumstances of this tragedy. Let me ask Mr. Moghaddam, as difficult as it may be for you, I believe it's very important for the audience to hear it from you. How did you feel upon hearing the news of the attack on the Flight 752?
As you know, Daniel, I lost my wife, Shakiba, and my son, Rustin, in this homicide, actually. Every family has their own goals for future, for kids especially. So now for us, all plans, all futures is gone just in a blink. I hadn't worked since last year. I can't even sleep well. Even my activities is just got hit by this incident. I had about 60 session therapy, uh, medicine, and lots going on to all of us. But the only hope that we have is like a tiny light on the dark tunnel. That's we just looking at it, and we see that now. Actually, after a year, we see and we realize that the very tiny light, it's becoming bigger and bigger as long as we reach to the end of that dark tunnel. So this is our life. We fighting, we put pressure on government uh, with help of the media. So now after a year, we are here that we see that the news actually that we reach some kind of achievement by now.
Okay. I can't begin to imagine your pain and suffering. I was wondering, what were you? Did you hear the news live on TV, or what were you doing at the time?
Last time I was with Shakiba. I was with Shakiba on phone actually, and like every day we talk about 4 or 5 hours a day by WhatsApp. So I was with them since they left home toward to reach to airport. I was with them all the way uh, till they got on board to plane. And then she said, now is the time which we have to shut off the phone. And then I said, okay, I meet you in 2 or 3 hours when you're reaching here. I sat while on a couch and watched some programs. Then I decided to just go out. And then I said, okay, I'm going out. I grab a pizza and then coming back. When I finish that, then they are there and we talk again. But suddenly I received a phone call from my friend Khosrow, and he said to me, how's the Shakibas and Rostin? Do you have any news from them? I said, no, the last time they were on plane and I was so happy and they were happy because uh, everybody thought about the war is going to start and missile going to come, what's going to be happen. So all of us were happy actually. And then he said, did you heard the news? I said, what news? He mentioned that BBC just showed that the Ukrainian flight just crashed right after departure. And then I just faint. And then when I just back, there were about 50 people surrounding me.
Wow.
And you were in Kiev airport?
No, I was in Toronto.
Toronto, okay.
Yeah, I was in Toronto.
You were expecting, I think it's for people who are not familiar with the flight routes from the Western Hemisphere to Iran. There are not that many direct flights, and most people have to travel to an intermediary airport, some layover, usually a few hours. And what I think happens very frequently is for people to say, yes, I will talk to you in 3-4 hours once I'm in Kiev or London or Dubai or somewhere in Turkey, to essentially track your loved ones' safe travels. I assume that's what happened. It's truly heartbreaking. I'm really sorry. I just want to take a moment to say hello to Mr. Beytollahi, who has joined us. Please accept my greetings and welcome. And we were just talking to Mr. Moghaddam about the tragedy, the human aspect of it. But I was wondering if Shervan want to also say hi to Mr. Beytollahi and start by asking him one of the questions.
Hi to everybody. My condolences goes to the family and the victims of the flight 752. That was really tragic. And I really feel the same as a family to them. Imagine airplane with no any the problem taking off and about 1500 feet above the ground is being shut down. And we can talk about it. So I don't think that was human error or something like that at all. If the area was being actually informed as a military event goes on, all the international flights has to be deceased and shouldn't be taking off at all. But what we see over here, it's totally different. It wasn't under war circumstances at all. And they assumed that the cruise missile was coming toward. That's wrong too. Cruise missile is coming in, not going out. That plane was taking off and going up. It was climbing. And then the radar knew about that because when the pilot, before starting the engines, they already sent the flight plan to the radar, to all the entities that they know that flight number, taking off at that time, going to the route at the specific airspeed and specified altitude. And pilot to find out about that, actually to acknowledge the flight plan, the radar gonna read it to the pilot, and the pilot be acknowledge that. What they do that because maybe some circumstances going to change of the altitude, change of the airspeed, or something like that, and pilot has no aware of that one. And so after the flight plan being acknowledged, they ask the pilot to squawk mode, IFF, which is identification, friendly or foe. So then the blink is going on the radar that this flight number, it's specified as friendly, and they know about it. And it doesn't matter the size or movable site or whatever, they know about it. It shows on the radar. And that is what I'm saying. It's, I don't know what was going on in the plane, something like that. There was something suspicious that they was going out of the country. I don't know about that at all. But what I assume that was intentional fire. So after the airplane is taking off, they had enough time to pass over the site. About 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a lot for the 350 miles per hour flight or something like that. And even after that, another 90 seconds, it could be 180 seconds. They can manage many things to avoid from that catastrophe things was happening. But they didn't. And also the wreckage and the debris, it been cleaned up so fast without knowledge the countries who they were involved, their passenger, their actually citizens, or they were involved on that one. They have to be there. They have to be look for everything to investigate that one. So debris and wreckage of the plane has been cleaned up. They rushed to that.
So I believe you were saying, sorry to interrupt you, but you were saying that the wreckage scene should be treated as essentially a crime scene for everyone to be able to investigate, but they essentially acted like robbers who showed up to the crime scene with a bulldozer to clean up and avoid any chance of their hands being identified, their fingerprints being identified all over the place.
That is true because the countries who they are, see, under the circumstances, ICAO or FAA, you have to do that because those countries they are involved and they have to send their own investigator.
And these countries are Ukraine, Canada, and other countries who had citizens of their citizens boarding that flight. Is that right?
That's true, right. So after that, they refused to actually to get the countries who they can open the black box. So there's only two countries can open it. One is America, United States, and the second one is France. So I hear that about a month ago they sent it to France. After all this year time, about 11 months, they refused to do that.
Mm-hmm.
These are suspicious, I think, to me, actually, why they have it in their hand or something. Actually, the black box, what it's going to say about the pilots from the beginning, crew members and everything, recording between radar and everything, these are all, nothing more than that. But why they were refusing that one also, I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of really very, very strange to me.
Strange indeed.
On that, actually, Mr. Beytollahi, on that, I have a follow-up question. So as you pointed out, a year after the disaster, they just passed the flight recorder to, I guess, the French authorities or non-Iranian authorities just a month ago. And we still have to hear the data interpreted and compiled, and probably even voice and conversations of the pilots from the cockpit. But even before examining the data on the black box or the flight recorder, we know some basic facts that, for instance, the trajectory of the plane shows that it turned around after being hit by the first missile, which did not damage it materially. The pilot was still in charge. How do we know that? Because the plane turned around and was diving down to land on the origin airport, basically. And then it got hit by two more missiles and obviously crashed. And some civilians, residents of the towns near the airport, because there's residential area around that, were able to even capture videos or pictures of the missiles hitting the plane. And eventually it crashed near a residential place, a residential neighborhood. So how do you interpret that? Like we know that we have to wait for the full examination of the data on the black box, but just based on the facts that we reviewed, based on the turnaround, how do you interpret that? And do you agree that at least 2 or 3 missiles were shot at the plane?
Well, definitely it is 2 at least, I would say that because the first missile hit the engine. The pilot was alive and he did an evasive action to return to the airport. That's what started churn. They were alive, everybody was alive because that was hitting the engine. And so the 372, I was in that airplane can really easily with one engine make landing, safe landing. But the second missile hit the fuselage, the whole body of the plane. That was it. So the time between the first missile and the second one is 10 seconds. It says to me it's not on ripple or on international or malfunction of the system. It shows it was intentionally. They find out that didn't hit the body, the fuselage, the second we fire.
Understood. So that increases, to me, that makes it more likely that they deliberately targeted the plane, and it was not just a machine error or a faulty system or even human error. So Daniel, would you like to ask the same the next question from Mr. Moghaddam, Shahin Moghaddam?
Of course, but before we go forward, Mr. Moghaddam, did you have any thoughts on what we just discussed with Mr. Beytollahi?
Actually, some maybe, as some Mr. Beytollahi mentioned, but there are some key questions and facts which shows it wasn't human error at all. After several meetings online and in person, which we had with Mr. For example, it's better to don't call the names actually. One of the Torem 1 defense system specialist who launched such equipments, and he published even a book regards these station. Mm-hmm. We heard a lot from Iran about these Torem 1 unit errors and regarding these homicides. First, they said the missile was launched by mistakes. Then they said there were 107-degree misalignment. Then they said the command center thought there is a cruise missile toward Tehran. It is clear that Torem 1 unit would never be able to shoot a missile to commercial plane. By default, actually, how come these advanced units couldn't differentiate between the 10-foot missile and the 110-foot long airplane with such a huge speed difference, actually? How is possible to take a departing aircraft for an arriving missile to Tehran? How is it possible for these highly trained operators to lose the north in a city like Tehran, which is surrounded by a very tall mountain in the north? Why didn't they close airspace during the war, during the wartime? And we know that all airlines received caution warning from the United States 3 times on that night. It's already registered. We have some even phone calls from passenger who declares once they got on board, then they were asked to get out the plane, and then they got on board again. And in the other evidence, it was mentioned they delayed this flight by unreasonable causes to reach the desired time point. So why they did such things? Why are there more than 80 suitcases unloaded to the plane? We know Iran is protected by multi-layer S-300 defense shield. I believe it's made of 3 layers. I think so, which are triggered one after the other. And Torem 1 units are the last short-range defense system at the end point, which is like this one in the Tehran. If there isn't any signal from the previous S-300 unit, then undoubtedly this unit was couldn't be like operate by itself. So it means that someone or somehow this unit was offline to shot this specific plane as a specified target on purpose. At the end, there is no doubt for us and all those specialists who are providing us with information and analysis. The IRGC shot that plane on purpose as an human, and they use it as a human shield, and this is already on war crime and homicide.
Yeah.
That's a point actually that Shahin brought up. The multi-layer air defense system in Iran. Naturally, it is if it is defending against long-range missiles from Americans or whoever, the longer range radars and missile defense system must trigger first, and then the shorter range, which is MTOR-1. But in this case, the short range operated on its own without any warning from long range radars and defense system, which is very suspicious and make it nearly impossible to believe that it was a human error.
Yeah, it's. I just wanted to, in the interest of time, ask yet another question from Mr. Moghaddam. Many Iranian Canadians were unfortunately killed in this tragedy. The government of Canada, had they been able to put any meaningful pressure on the Islamic Republic to buy their cooperation with international authorities? Have they been able to professionally examine the flight recorder and maybe perhaps open the path to seek justice for Canadian families who lost their loved ones?
Recently we observed actual pressure on Iran by Canada. On the other hand, we know Canada has not that much power on this case because according to regulation, Canada can just act as an observer to this case. And only Ukraine as the plane owner and the airline owner and France and the US as a manufacturer, they are directly involved to the negotiation and to the case. But they could have put pressure on ICAO to condemn Iran as ICAO did in MH17 case for a simple condemnation. But they can direct these case to ICJ after Iran actually released the final reports, which must be done in a year with the possible of some months extension. Now we are waiting for Iran to release the final report. Of course, if they have actually any reports to show, then we will see how Canada will act and what the case going forward.
Okay. On that, actually, I have a follow-up question and related note from, again, Mr. Moghaddam. So imagine if the victims, I believe there are 57 or about 60 Iranian Canadians, citizens, and many more residents killed in this tragedy. Imagine if these citizens were not dual citizens and they were, let's say, white Canadians. And how would you feel that the government of Canada would have reacted differently? And do you sense any discrimination or double standards because the victims were Canadians but minority Canadians and dual citizens, in terms of the government of Canada helping the families of the victim seek justice and hold the perpetrators accountable?
Actually, no, not at all, because we deeply believe they are doing what is right at the time. They are maybe a little bit slow, but it does not have anything to do with being a dual citizen at all. But I believe if there were some, for example, American on board, the US would have been more strict on this case. But no, I don't believe that the dual nationality be involved in this decision and the Canadian Act, actually.
Okay.
Chairman, if you don't mind, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question again from Mr. Moghaddam. I'm sorry, we're just bombarding you with questions. The way that the government of Canada has been acting, it sounds like you think that we're going in the right direction. What would you see as an acceptable endpoint to essentially punish the perpetrators?
The thing is, actually, till now, Canada hasn't reached any achievements by now. During the early months, the government, like Mr. Champagne or Mr. Garneau and Mr. Goodell, said we will get you the highest compensation amount. They just wanted to just negotiate and then just solve the case by the compensation. But now they talk about accountability, they talk about the courts, they talk about the justice, untrustable regime, and some more specific words that they're using nowadays. And we saw that Mr. Champagne in the last interview that he mentioned directly that he doesn't trust Iran's regime. Actually, directly he mentioned that. This is actually is a family achievement. It took us for a year to show the truth of Iran regime to Canada. But by ICAO regulation, we know that the Canada can't do much. They only have to wait till Iran release the final report, and then they just direct the case. They may it would be possible to just they direct the case to the International Court of Justice, which we are looking for it and we are after. So we only have to wait to see when Iran going to release this report.
I see. It sounds like you would envision a referral to the ICC as a potential and desirable outcome.
Yeah.
Okay. Shervan, I think it sounds like Ms. Moghaddam expects the ICC to intervene at some point. But as he mentioned earlier, had it been any U.S. citizens on board on this flight, I can't imagine that the response would have been the same. What is your take? What do you think would have been the outcome, or a more desirable punishment that would fit the crime?
That's actually a very good point. I am almost certain that had any American citizens being on board, whether single citizen or dual citizen, the American response would be much more different, much stronger than Canada's. How do we know that? Because Mr. Moghaddam just pointed out that it took the government of Canada almost a year to officially declare that, for the foreign minister to officially declare that they don't trust the Islamic Republic regime. That's incredibly weak. That's as weak as it gets, as soft as it gets. You should not, they should not have trusted the regime even on January 7th, even before shooting down this plane, because it's a terrorist, it's a world number one sponsor of terrorism and perpetrator of many more heinous acts throughout these 40 years. So the fact that it took so long for them to get convinced, for the government of Canada to get convinced that the Iranian regime is not trustworthy, that already reeks of weakness and soft response. And I definitely do hope that the case ends up in International Criminal Court, i.e. ICC. I hope that happens. I hope the Canadian authorities do their job and take it to ICC. But beyond that, and more broadly, I think what we need to remember about the Islamic Republic regime is that this is not a normal regime. The reputation, good reputation, which is a huge factor for any country, for any responsible government, is of zero value to them, because they don't have any to begin with. They don't have any good reputation to begin with. So it's impossible for them to lose like more of reputation. So they're already as notorious as it gets. So if Canada or United States or any member of the international community wants to put any real pressure on the regime or on IRGC specifically, they must hit them where it hurts. For instance, their financials, their bank accounts. We know that people with dubious ties, Iranian citizens with dubious ties to the IRGC regime, have recently moved to Canada as permanent residents, and sometimes after a few years obtaining citizenship. And they brought with themselves millions of dollars to the financial system in Canada. What is stopping the government of Canada doing a thorough audit on high net worth people of Iranian origin with dubious ties to IRGC? I'm not saying go and convict them right away or confiscate their assets, but you can start a proper audit on them within the bounds of law and reason and dig to the bottom of it. And that would put a real pressure on IRGC and teach them a lesson that these heinous actions have consequences. On another note, the Parliament of Canada has already declared IRGC a terrorist organization. The foreign minister, Mr. Champagne, has refused to implement the law of the land and properly categorize IRGC as a terrorist organization. That's another leverage of pressure that Canada can enable. So there's a lot more to do. That's my point.
Great points. Mr. Moghaddam, has anyone within the Islamic Republic government reached out to you in terms of, I guess, conveying their condolences or possibly offering any compensation or opening any avenues for reprieve for you? Mr. Moghaddam, I think you're still on mute.
Okay. Yeah, actually, yes, they did on early days, but they all mentioned the incident and this homicide as a human errors at the early days. But they didn't provide any financial support as Canada did, and Mr. Trudeau government paid $25,000 per passenger to the immediate families. Yes, they asked the family to attend the Iran court, but how can a murderer hold the trial to achieve justice against themselves? It's impossible. They killed our beloved, and then they ask us to just go and then file your lawsuit, and then we following up. So actually, it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense to ask your judge who is murdered by himself.
Yep, it borders on ridiculous to expect the criminal to prosecute himself.
Yes, exactly. Many of them, while I was in Iran, some of them like Mrs. Eftekar, like Mr. Jahangiri, the Tehran premier, the mayor, they called, they reached me out and they asked me to just attend to my ceremonies, but I rejected all of them because how come, how dare you are that you ask me to attend to my family ceremony, which you killed them by yourself.
Mm-hmm. They were essentially asking you to stay silent.
Actually, not like that. They didn't interfere. Actually, my programs, not at all. They didn't reach to me closely. They didn't ask me anything. I think it came by orders. I don't know. It is my feeling that they didn't want to interrupt or do any interruption or make us more aggressive, or they just want to let us to be calm and then do our memorial ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
So soft pressure, basically, not
yeah, kind of. Even for when we ask for a cemetery, they send us a letter that you are able to just use anywhere, any place that as your desire, as you want. So there were no limits on that time to even where you want to get the grave and where you want to do, how you want to do your ceremony. They didn't do such interfere, even maybe just for me, maybe for other families as well. But for me, they didn't do any interruption. They didn't do anything. But I received some offers to just support for helps to attend my ceremony, but I reject them all.
Mhm.
Even at the early days, they just mentioned that to pay some amount, a very cheap amount for each passenger to immediate family, but they never did it actually. They just told that we are going to pay, I can tell you to pay about 20 million Toman that time for each passenger. But you know how funny is that amount?
Yeah, yeah, peanuts. I would like to, Mr. Beytollahi has been quiet for a while. I would like to ask the next question from Mr. Beytollahi. In your professional opinion, do you think this was a premeditated act instead of what the Islamic Republic claims, which is essentially human error or procedure error? And if so, what are these steps from here on out in terms of seeking justice?
Well, to be honest with you, to interpret it as a premeditated act, maybe at the last time, not pretty, they could avoid that one. If they, what I'm saying, maybe there was something suspicious on the plane, either person, documents, whatever. They found out about it late, and that what they shut it down. But if it was, premeditated, they could take anything before flight. What I want, investigate and take everything out, whatever they had. I don't know. But I know it was the last moment that make a decision to shut down the plane. And then they were really, those passengers, unfortunate that they were on that plane. And a government can do anything for themselves to, 176 people to be die on the air, loved ones to everyone. That's easy for them, I believe so. Otherwise, they would think twice to not do it again, or something like that. Shouldn't be happen. Shouldn't be happen. I would say the world shouldn't be, be silent about that. That is tragic to everyone. Yeah. It could be Air France. It could be so many other things, or can be repeated. There is no guarantee as far as this regime is alive, and everything is in hand of IRGC. Before the revolution, defense was part of Air Force. After revolution, they took it away to make it fourth branch of the force, and they gave it to the hand of the IRGC. IRGC is it's a military one hand, and the other hand, it's a terrorist group. Proxy war all over the Middle East. That's a signature of IRGC.
Right.
And killing the people and so many things, lavish things that they did. They could do that one too. Well, I'm not saying that the radarman or something like that are not expert. After 40 years, they could be expert on that because they know they have what the instrument they have they work with. But what happened, it's definitely intentional. It is intentional fire.
Okay, it was not friendly fire.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, and what would be the standard procedure if it was determined that it was not friendly fire? Like, would it be referred to the FAA, or would it be like what would you, in your opinion, what would be the appropriate next steps to hold people who perpetrated this to justice?
Well, I would say FAA is one of them, and then I ICAO is another one. These are very important. IATA, they are they are connected to each other, all the airlines, and brand names and whatever it is, they are connected to each other for the rules, regulations, and everything. And believe me, they try hard to make rules and regulations better and better and safer since 1947 that they, been established. They changed a lot, and they came along with all the airlines around the world that we can see. So they have to have the some questions about that, serious question, how it could be happening.
And to your knowledge, has it happened? Have they asked questions of the Islamic regime?
I have no knowledge about that what they did or what not they did, because I didn't search for that actually, or I didn't hear, even though maybe they are not published at the time, after all. But I'm sure they're investigating very well these things. But the circumstances of the countries, relationship between countries, Canada, Iran, the United States, Iran is different totally. European, they are different. There are many things that they are involved in these circumstances. Well, but justice has to prevail.
I sure hope so. We are coming on the hour mark. I think, Shervan, have we missed any points that we wanted to discuss?
Okay, actually, we have two questions from the audience. One first from Mr. Jalal, last name M is not indicated. Regarding Mr. Beytollahi's note that there might have been something on the plane, couldn't in that case the Iranian government ground the plane for a reason rather than paying this much price? I don't think I don't think that was the point that Mr. Beytollahi made. But let me ask the other question, which is related, then we can comment on that. Mr. Haide Tawakkoli from the Constitutional Party of Iran asked, what are the possible motives for this deliberate attack from Mr. Beytollahi? And actually, I have some comments on that I can answer afterwards, but that's actually a very good question. If we conclude that based on the technical aspects of this attack, it was not a mistake, it was not a faulty machine, it was not a human error, and it was a deliberate attack, then somebody must have sent the order. So what was the motive? What do you think was the motive, Mr. Beytollahi?
Well, I'm really not on that position to say what the motive was, but according to my knowledge about the Islamic Republic, at whatever they do for their behavior, there are so many persons that they can make a decision. I mean, there is no feel of command or something like that as well. So they had the really chance. They have three tools to check there is a commercial plane or there was a cruise missile or something like that. First of all, they showed on the radar. Cruise missile, it's about, for example, 10, 12 feet, something like that. It shows on the radar, it's like a dot, but plane, the commercial plane, it shows big dot, big, really big. And the person who they are working with that system, they know it very well. And also the flight number is on that too. SB 752, for example, it shows. And second of all is visual. The plane was about maybe 1,500 above the ground. It's easy to find out about that, even though it's dark. It's a commercial plane. It's a big plane. It's not like a one engine popular or something like that. But the other thing, it's a camera that they have. they can visualize it very well at night.
Mm.
They had tools to do that, to identify it, but they did not, or they did, I don't know, but they tried to shut it down. Well,
Okay.
the other question, it says a plane could be returned to the landing or something like that. If they find out something is in there, it's possible for that. Maybe it's not, but we have to know the behavior of the Islamic Republic. It's not
Okay.
really something that you can see it as a manner of the uh, friendly to everyone. No, they are not.
As crass as it may sound, the Islamic regime does not value life.
Yeah.
So in choosing between those two options, they don't see the magnitude of human suffering that they inflict.
Okay. And on that note, actually, I think we have already established beyond reasonable doubt that it was a deliberate attack. Now, naturally, the next question is the motive. Why? Why did the regime choose to, or some elements in the regime, let's say some IRGC officers, chose to do this heinous crime, kill so many innocent people, and impose a rather hefty reputational, even financial cost on the regime, further cost on the regime. So let's review some basic facts. Like from now on, it's going to be a little speculative, inevitably. Let's review some basic facts. We already established that that night they were expecting some retaliation, some missile attack or bombs or whatever from Americans. Their their air defense system, anti-missile system, everything was at maximum pressure, as maximum alert, maximum sensitivity. So the indisputable fact is that they did not cancel commercial flights on that night. That was a deliberate decision. Nobody can deny that. Why did they do that? The only reason could be because they wanted to use commercial flights as a human shield. Because remember, President Trump, just a few days before that, previous to that, had threatened that if they kill any American troops or personnel, he would hit 50 points or 53 points or something all over Iran, all sensitive sites. So they needed the human shield. That's why they did not cancel the commercial flights. And imagine if President Trump had decided to hit back at that night. Just consider that scenario as a thought experiment. If at that night, US had hit 50 points all over Iran, and this plane had already been shot down by the regime, would anybody blame the regime at all? I bet most of the mainstream media, particularly the left-leaning media, would make all sort of excuses for the regime. They would portray them as victims. Oh, look what you did. You hit them, you hit 50 different points and they lost control and they panicked. And in a panic attack, of course, they shot their own plane. So it's on Trump. It's in America. Blame it America. Blame it on America is their motto. One thing to remember about the nature of this regime is that blame it on America has been their motto from day one. So if America had attacked the regime, even just military sites, on that night, they would have the perfect cover to either blame it on American missiles, or even if it was found out by radar or by satellite images or etc., that it was indeed IRGC, they would say, okay, what do you expect? We were being hit all over the place, left and right. And of course, we misfired and shot down a commercial plane. So I think that was the motive. But it backfired and turned into a huge scandal because the Americans did not attack. So I mean, there are better explanations, but that's what comes to my mind.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Do we have any other questions left?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And on that note, I would like to thank our guests, Mr. Beytollahi, Mr. Moghaddam. Thank you so much for attending and giving your time to us. Thank you so much to our audience. I've seen dozens of people joining, and I hope this was a fruitful endeavor for all of us. I would like to also hope that in very near future we'll see the justice that is appropriate for this crime.
There
Thank
is
you,
an
everyone.
injustice actually in Iran's judiciary system.
I'm sorry?
There is injustice. They cannot bring the accused to the justice. Actually, it's not possible for them.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, maybe not inside Iran, but hopefully through the ICC or other international bodies that would hold them accountable.
Because the regime legislation is basically unable to bring the justice because they don't have enough power. Like Mr. Fadai, Mr. Salami, Rashid, Firuzabadi, Ashtari, Bagheri, Qani, Safavi, Shamkhani, Dehkhan, and some others actually, above all the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And we have proof that all of the above mentioned were present at the meeting hours before the downing the plane. So this system doesn't have the enough power to bring them justice.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.